forward. It's obvious.
We're live.
Welcome to Dreamit Live. I have here LD Salmanson from Cherre. You guys are on time, which is awesome. Most people are not. So we're going to just talk amongst ourselves for a little bit while we wait for everyone to come in. I thought maybe we'll have a little bonus content for the people who show up on time. So LD, why don't we talk about your favorite scotch while you're waiting? That's what we were talking about before.
Yeah, I'm not an Islay person. I actually don't like peated scotches, so definitely the Highlands are kind of my favorite. Balvenie is really my favorite. Love a Macallan, love a Glenmorangie, but really Balvenie's been my favorite. I like the 17 sherry cask. We were just talking about the sherry cask. It's just aged at the end. That sherry's a little darker note, a little sweeter, but not like bourbon sweet. And recently, I would say probably the last couple of years, probably my go-to is the 14 Caribbean rum cask.
Ah, interesting.
Just a little different flavor. Again, not
spicier.
too bad. Yeah, a little spicier. I like that one. What's yours?
So, first of all, for those of you who just joined and wondering what the hell we're talking about, this is Dreamit Live with LD Salmanson from Cherre. We are live now. A little behind the scenes here. We find that most people take a minute or two to show up. So those of you who are here now, you get to hear about how we love scotch. And for those of you who missed the beginning, LD's more on the smooth side, and I'm more on the smoky side with Talisker, Lefroy, Lagavulin, and the usual stuff.
Yeah, the Obans of the world. I never drink those.
Or Brookladi's a good one too.
Brookladi's amazing. They have the best distiller ever.
Yep.
He was at Bowmore before that, right? For
That's
a long
what I heard.
time. Yeah, he's really good. He's like the god of scotch. I remember he went around all in Japan and brought whiskey to Japan.
I have a funny story about one of the gods of scotch. Again, for those of you, we will get to the Urbantech stuff in a moment. We just give it a late.
This is whiskey with Dreamit.
So I was at a dinner. It was like 7-course meal. Each one was paired with a different scotch. And about 2 courses, 3 courses in, I realized that instead of the regular, like instead of like the Talisker or the Macallan, it was McKillop's Choice Talisker, McKillop's Choice Macallan. So I raised my hand. I'm like, because I don't read ahead, you'll figure this out. I go, hey, I'm just curious, why the McKillop's Choice version and not the actual underlying scotch? And the guy who's been pouring the scotch the entire time says, that's because I'm Ian McKillop.
Oh, yeah.
So always read the invite. Okay, for those of you who are coming in, we're about to go live with LD Salmanson from Cherre. I'm Andrew Ackerman from Dreamit Urbantech. If you're here for the Goldberg Bar Mitzvah, you are totally in the wrong place. Are we clear to go?
20 seconds.
Awesome, we got another 20 seconds. So,
we get to talk more about
nothing
scotch.
For 20 seconds.
We get to talk
and there
more
we go.
about scotch.
First F-bomb, under 3 minutes. We're good to go.
We were counting.
Yeah,
well, it doesn't really count, so I think we reset the counter.
Okay, so fine. It is a record with an asterisk next to it. Okay.
4, 3, and we're going live.
So thank you for bearing with us, everyone. Now we are officially live on Dreamit. I'm Andrew Ackerman. I run Dreamit's Urbantech program. This is LD Salmanson. He runs Cherre, one of our portfolio companies. Who are we and why are we here? We are here to talk about how you sell in Urbantech. But before we go into that, LD, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and about Cherre so they know where we're coming from?
Yeah, sure. So LD, I'm one of the founders of Cherre. We've been building a lot of companies together as a founding team. Ben and I have known each other since the 4th grade. Feels a long time ago, about 30 years-ish, a little more. Yeah, I'm getting old. We built the first one back in the 90s in the IT services space and sold that to CompuByte. After the Army, I was a captain. Went to school in Israel, went to London to help Ben spin off a company in the HR space. If you want to hire 50 people or maybe 100,000 people for a really short period of time, Ben built a really credible hire-to-fire platform for that. Clients like the Olympics and Ticketmaster and the railroad industry. We came back to the States. Ben went to MIT. I went to Wharton to get our MBAs. While in school, co-founded a private equity trading platform under the Knight Capital umbrella. So taking data from public, private, internal sources and fusing that data together to build better decision models for late-stage private equity. And we were acquired by Oppenheimer in 2013. I co-head the private equity group there for a few years. Eventually we left in 2016, again with Ben, who was in the meantime over at Lowy Family Group, the owners of Westfield Malls, to come back and do the same thing for the real estate industry, right? It looks very much like the financial services industry back in the 80s and 90s. A lot of siloed data, lack of infrastructure, really smart people, but really can't make the data-driven decisions that we would typically like to support. That's why we started Cherre. So Cherre's a data fusion platform. We help our clients, banks, insurance companies, hedge funds, really large real estate companies, take data from public, private, internal sources. So all the public data, permits, violations, zoning, taxes, deeds, things like that. All their pay data feeds, so things like CompStak and Atom and weather patterns and foot traffic, anything that they can think of. And finally, all their internal data from systems like Yardi or MRI or Argus and things like that, and a lot of unstructured data as well. And then connecting all that data for them and giving it back to them either an API to power things like workflow automation or a transactional database to support things like predictive analytics.
Cool. So let's unpack some of that if you don't mind. The way you made it sound right there is like, oh my God, real estate is drowning in data. But it's not quite as simple as that, is it? So maybe, again, picking up on the financial data was X, real estate data is Y. Why don't you compare and contrast a little bit about how they differ and where that ultimately plays out for you?
Yeah, I think in the financial services world, we have a QSIP, right? The concept of this is the security we're talking about. We can always attach things to that QSIP, or we can kind of take alternative data, which is a trend today, and kind of talk around the asset, right? But the assets are fairly well defined. They're usually publicly traded. They're on some kind of standardized exchange. The payloads are pretty standardized. And you have these companies like Bloomberg and Aladdin and CapIQ and all these giants, right, in the infrastructure. A lot of companies you probably never heard of that just do the back-end connections for some of these exchanges. And that creates an infrastructure where everyone can build on top of and really allows a lot of cool things.
Let me break that down just a little bit. So just one way to think about a QSIP is almost like the social security number.
Yeah, it's like a
unique identifier.
Yeah, it's a unique identifier for an asset.
In this context, when we're talking about asset, we're talking about a stock, a bond, an option, or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And when we look at a real estate or any what we'd call a property, right, which is a really funny word to me.
Yep.
What is a property, right? Is it the tax lot? Is it the physical lot on which the building sits? Is it the building? Is it the apartment? Is it an office, right? And none of these things are really unique, right? A building can expand lots, lots can expand buildings. Any type of combination that matters, right? And people might say something like, well, we'll identify it by the address. Well, that's a really challenging one as well. A building could have thousands of addresses, right? If you look at 30 Rock, there's literally 1,000 addresses for that tax lot. So actually trying to connect data becomes really complicated because you have systems going back sometimes hundreds of years, right, in written records, defining different types of data points and systems of record that are very siloed. And now we come, all of a sudden, 2020, we're trying to figure out how do we take all these disparate systems and data feeds and try and connect them together to make sense of it. And it's
So
really,
I'm going to
really
break it down a little bit here because my buffer fills pretty quickly. So it's almost as if you're talking about a bond sometimes, but on the other hand, you're talking about one particular coupon on the bond. And other times, it's as if, we just added some coupons to that bond because we acquired air rights. And so the actual, what are we talking about at the base level is squishier.
Yeah, it's
and then
really
identifying it, there is no QSIP equivalent. An address is not an address is not an address.
Yeah, you hear this trend recently in PropTech of let's have a unique ID and a unique immutable ID for a property, whatever that means, right? And then that'll be the standard. There's some really cool companies out there that have been trying to do that over time. Reese was trying to do it. Reonomy's trying to do it. Back in the day, CoStar and I guess they probably still do it. CoreLogic. So these companies, were really trying to kind of create that QSIP concept. But the problem is that each one of them is talking about something else, right? So that unique identifier isn't really unique. It's not immutable. It's not one-to-one, and it's really hard to use that as something to try and connect data on. What you really want to have is an object model through nodes, and they can have multiple complex relationships. And the arc that connects between those two nodes on the graph could be very rich in data, not just this kind of single-dimensional piece of data.
Cool. So what we're talking about is, if I understand you correctly, and if I'm translating it correctly, the attempt to force what that kind of atom level of property is into one mode or another is just almost doomed to failure.
Yeah.
And that the way to think of it is to embrace the fact that sometimes you're talking about this, sometimes you're talking about that, and the only way you can do that is by really understanding the context of what you're talking about, the data that's attached to it.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, easy stuff. No worries. Let's keep going.
Fun stuff.
So now that you have a concept of what you're talking about, at least at what point in time, stitching all that data together, right? Data clean, data's dirty, is it easy to get at? Talk to me a little bit about that. It's in financial services, it seems pretty cut and dry.
Yeah, well, I would argue it's still complicated in financial services as well, especially as you leave kind of the small core, the small world of core assets. It's very hard in real estate, right? So the first challenge is where do you get the data from? And data can come in multiple formats and come from multiple places. And some of those places are not very friendly for extraction of data. They weren't designed to export
Give me an
data.
example of like unfriendly data.
Yeah, so maybe older systems of Yardi, for example. So Yardi had enterprise versions on-prem sometimes, and those versions were designed to solve a really point solution in accounting or management, something like that for the company. It was never designed to export data into like a data lake in some kind of newer fashion. They do have a newer version, obviously, kind of that Voyager, which does support API and is definitely moving that direction. Together with VTS and Argus, these types of companies are really trying to figure out how they work together, but it's still fairly challenging. So the vast majority of data points you're trying to pull out come from really dirty sources, really unstructured. They weren't designed for regular pulls. So that means you have to create a process to extract data from these places regularly, right? So that's the first challenge. Once you've extracted data, and we follow a design pattern, which is called typically CQRS, which is command query response separation instead of things like CRUD. So in a CRUD, you have a record, you create it, you read it, you update it, you delete it. It's kind of this moving kind of system, and then you lose the temporal aspect of when you've changed something. You might have a separate database doing when did we update something, right? We think of things as an event log. Something happened, it's never erased, right? And now we have to go figure out from what happened to go pull that data back. So that means that every data that we extract, we throw into an event log, into a giant transactional database, typically BigQuery. Second stage is all these different types of cleaning processes, right?
So just at the risk of oversimplifying that, you're not only taking a data point, you're taking the data point at a point in time with that context.
Correct.
As an attempt to figure out like, how much do I trust this data now?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to lose any fidelity, right? I want to know everything that I can about the source. I may not need it in the future, but I don't know what I'm going to need in the future. I want to be able to go back in time and restate things. We also have a challenge that two clients might look at the same data and want to do different things, right? And if we store it as a single record, that means that two clients will see the same thing, right?
Actually, you gave me a great example before where the reality is not necessarily what they need. You were talking about square footage.
Oh yeah, that's a fun one, right? So square footage of New York City is a fun place. In general, I love the city. I've lived here a big part of my life. But if you go to the city and say, okay, what's a square foot of a lot? And I just want one number. It's funny, there isn't, right? You have one value for the square foot of, you get from Department of Finance. You pay your taxes based on that. You have a different number for Department of Buildings. That's what your zoning rights are based on. And if you actually went and measured, it's completely different ones. The question doesn't become which one is correct, is which one is correct for my specific use case, right? So that would be a perfect example of
truth
maintaining.
Is only roughly relevant in this case.
Well, I mean, different use cases, right? So I don't know what the truth is. And when people say, what's the truth? The answer is, for what purpose, right? So that's the stage of, we pull everything into this master data lake. So take all the data, throw it into a big pool, right? And the next step will be, okay, now that's in the pool, there are a lot of these transformations that we want to start doing, change zeros and nulls to just be, maybe zero, right? Things like that.
Clean up the data so you can actually stitch it together.
Yeah, and then you start stitching it together, right? And you want to be able to model a unified model that's very dynamic, so it's not dependent on what a single structure would look like, and it can be malleable in the sense that it can fit whatever a client needs. And that process is where we spend most of our time, right? It starts as completely manual, and the end goal is for it to completely be automated, right? Our end goal is you push a button, anything you threw in was connected magically, right? Never starts that way. It starts absolutely manual. And you train models over time to be able to learn from your manual operations, and now you're basically tagging data in kind of in the machine learning world. That would be the lingo. You would say you're tagging data or training data. And once you're done, ideally in the end, you have a model that can take any data source and automatically connect it to any other data source and deliver it to a client in a manner that they need.
So really simple stuff. Right?
Yeah.
A couple of weeks, get an MVP, and you're good to
Done.
go.
Yeah.
Okay. Kidding aside, though we'll come back to the kidding, of course. It's a complex product. How do you sell a complex product like that to a customer who likely understands that the data are messy and hard to use, and may have even given up on a certain level of precision? So how do you get in the door? Do you pilot? Do you not pilot? Just talk through what kind of works for you, and also maybe what hasn't worked in the past.
Yeah, definitely. So it's enterprise sales, right? For better or for worse, and I'll come back to the actual real estate firm specific, because they're a little unique even within the world of enterprise sales. But in banks, insurance companies, hedge funds, in those folks, it's fairly classic enterprise sales, right? So you're trying to take, it's consultative type sales, right? You have a product that can do a lot of things, and your clients don't care about a lot of things, right? There's a specific problem they have and a specific solution they need. And you're looking for that type of what we would call typically in the venture world product market fit, but kind of we go back to the enterprise world, you're looking for a repeat solution, right? So in our example, in banks, insurance companies, hedge funds, it's I have a lot of data sets and I have a specific use case at the end. There's a predictive analytics use case, there's a workflow automation, pre-fill for insurance or underwriting, a specific BI tool, a reporting tool, or something that they know that's very valuable, right? Why does it matter that they're very valuable? Because they're not going to wait for you to come and tell them they need to solve it. It needs to be solved regardless of
They're
you
already
exist.
struggling with it.
And I look for ones where they're actively trying to solve it. Because if you're actively trying to solve it, you feel the pain point, you're willing to spend money to get there faster, right? And then you sit in a place where you're trying to be a build versus buy, right? That's where we sit. So you have a lot of data sets you want to connect. You have a specific use case. You're about to spend a lot of time, effort, and money. And if I can convince you that I can do it cheaper, better, and faster, you're going to want to do that with me in a way that you can scale, right? So we look for those types of worlds. And within 10 minutes into a call with a client, you can pretty much tell where this is going, like most enterprise sales. Do you feel the problem? Is it a real problem? Is it a painful problem that costs you money or will enable a lot of money for you? Are you actively trying to solve it and it's really important to you to solve it? And then how fast is the required solution, right? So those we do really well.
So I just want to roll it back.
Yeah.
Before you could get to that point, there were a lot of free-form conversations. Like you had to talk to enough people and figure out what came up over and over again. Because implied in what you just said, you'll come across a lot of use cases that are one-offs and two-offs.
Gotta say
and
no
you
a
have
lot.
the discipline to say no to it.
Yeah, you have to say no a lot.
At what point, in general, did you go from like, I'm just listening, I need to try to solve everything, I got to say yes to everything, to figuring out, you know what, now I know enough to say no to these things because they're not my scalable, repeatable, the thin end of that wedge that you go after first?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think a rule of thumb is probably up to about $1 million in revenue. You should probably kind of whore yourself out a bit in a sense that you want to be able to...
Just say yes.
I don't want to say just say yes because if it's a product that, I mean, I don't remember who said this, but do things that don't scale to learn what does scale, right? And you really don't know what will scale and what's repeatable until you've kind of hit that inflection point where you have a few clients that are paying a lot of money and they care about it. And then you realize, okay, what's common between these two cases, right? And you'll have a lot of conversations, right? With and to me, I always recommend it's right. Enterprise sales, you always have to get both the business person and the technical person on board for that sale, right? Yep. You can't sell the business alone. You can't sell technical alone. If you think you're winning and you've only talked to one, you really are not even close.
You're not
to
even
winning,
halfway
right?
there, really.
Yeah, and even after you've had them both on board, you still have to go, again, it's enterprise, procurement, and security, right? There's a lot of other things that need to happen before that deal closes, not the least of which is legal contracting that could literally take a year for no reason. So you really want to get to those two people. So there's many conversations with the business side and the technical side to learn how they interact with each other.
Any guidance as to whether you should start on the business or technical, or either way?
I think it depends on the company. So we're a really technical company. So typically the folks who are, and this I know in retrospect, not in the original, but I can tell you in retrospect, the people find our solution are literally Googling, how do I connect large amounts of real estate data, platforms for connecting data, stitching real estate data, right? So those are the keywords they're typically mining. And the person looking for that is not a business person, right? It's a technical person. So we're basically inbound only company. So I get either a phone call from the business person which says, hey, I heard you can do some magic. One of my competitors said so, which is 90% of the time a lie because that's how this business works. They're lying to each other about all their advantages don't really exist. Then you have to say, well, I can't say what your competitor is doing, but tell me your problem. Let's listen, right? And inevitably that will lead to, I need to connect a lot of data for a specific use case. Or you get a call from a technical person that said, I heard you got some magic solution that can, skip all these stages. And then you say, well, it's not magic, but it will allow you to skip some, save some time and money and will actually do a really good job. Is this helpful for you in your process? Yes or no?
So I don't know if you caught me smiling, like you're saying, like you glided over probably a several month period where you were selling to the wrong people first. That happens a lot. I mean, again, you take all the meetings at first and then suddenly over time, slowly over time, you start realizing which paths in tend to work better than others.
Yeah, I mean, I've been building companies most of my life, pretty much my entire life. So I like it because you're constantly humbled and you constantly learn. You hear no most of the time. You're told you're an idiot most of the time. You're told your solution makes no sense. Why'd you even start this company? Right?
That's just your wife.
Yeah, that's just my wife, right? And the clients are even worse. Funny, my wife is actually the most supportive person in this company. I mean, funny anecdote, we had a pretty nice acquisition offer pretty recently, and my wife is Israeli and really wanted to go back to Israel. And I said, before I say no to this, right, there's some implication. And she looks back and goes, listen, we made too many sacrifices to be at this point. You'll be miserable if you sell. You want to take over the world, go take over the world, I'm with you. So she's been incredibly supportive, and it's not easy, so I'm really appreciative of that. But yeah, I mean, you need to listen a lot and learn a lot and try and understand, especially, I don't know, I don't come from the real estate world. I mean, I do have a small real estate portfolio, but it's very different. I'm not a real estate expert, and understanding the challenges requires a lot of listening and learning, and understanding who is the business person this organization should be talking to. It's not the same in different organizations, right, or different industries. Who is a technical person, right? And we're also across different verticals. It's very different across verticals. And maybe coming back to the real estate world, it's really, really hard to talk with the large real estate investors because they're not used to thinking about things in data. Even though they'll say they're data-driven, they're really not. And maybe the top 20, 30 REITs, private equity firms, are in the process of building massive data lakes. Some are clients, and we do really well with them. But the vast majority of the folks just under that will say, great, I got an IT guy keeping the wireless on. What are you talking about? Connecting data, you know, some of the biggest families here, you ask them, how do you measure ROI? And the answer is, I don't measure ROI, we never sell. What's the point of measuring ROI? I've been looking at this asset for 100 years across 3 generations. Looks cheap historically. So it's really hard to convince those people to change the way they're thinking, right? And it's a long process. And
that comes out in the conversations. You say yes to all the meetings, you say yes to all the discussions, and over time you realize where kind of the thin end of the wedge is. Who do you go after first? What parts of the market will get there but not now? I want to switch gears a little bit, right? So this has been, what we've just said so far is enterprise sales, regardless of the type of company. There's some challenges that startups face when dealing with large enterprise sales that are unique to startups. So let's talk a little bit about how it's different when you are a 5-person, 10-person company. Maybe you've just raised $1 million seed. Maybe you haven't even done that.
Yeah,
how does that do? Oh, yeah, okay. Thank you, Captain Obvious. Let's talk about how it's brutal and what are maybe some tips and tricks that make it a little less brutal and you can actually close one.
Well, first we have to prepare the fact that it's going to be brutal, right?
Yeah.
I think it's very important. Tenaciousness is not underrated, right? It really, really requires you to be patient and know that it's going to be really painful in the beginning. And you're going to hit roadblocks that will appear insurmountable, right? So you're pitching to a bank. Bank says, I want on-prem. We absolutely can't deliver on-prem for a 5-10 person team. It's just impossible. I mean, I'm sure there are exceptions. Typically, it's impossible, right? So you have to be able to say no to all of those cases which you know you can't serve, right? So you have to...
Or can't yet serve.
Yeah, not at that immediate time, right? So you have to narrow your scope of clients, which makes it a really small universe, to those folks who you know you can actually deliver on right now. Then you have the challenge of, right, security, things like that. So compliance, security, these are really, I mean, it's enterprise sales, right?
And data. Clearly,
and if you're dealing with data that you're getting from them, it's even worse, right? And you have to deal with PII, how it's stored, things like that. And the cost of being SOC 2 compliant, right? It's a year process sometimes.
So just personally identifiable information, Sarbanes-Oxley.
SOC is...
everyone calls it SOC, though.
So SOC 2 compliant would typically mean that you're getting some type of audit that would pertain to the level of security in your organization. So things like data can't be stored locally, people coming in and out of the office, how data is being handled, who can see data and how the log is stored. Sometimes it'll even compliance might even go beyond SOC 2. It might go into drug, for example, we work with government organizations, so drug testing your employees and going through other types of fun background checks that I'm not sure all of our employees really enjoy. Those are all really hard for a startup because there's a cost issue to it. You usually have no idea what these things are, right? Most enterprise software companies, this is the first time they've heard of any of these things, and you're like, what now? And then what's my insurance? I need $5 million of cyber insurance. And you go, but what's cyber insurance? Then they give you a whole list of these, change management policy and clean desk. There's a long list of things that you never heard of at that point. Penetration testing. So not only is it really complicated, you've never seen it before, likelihood at that stage you're not going to pass any of these things, right? And it's likely that you don't have any big clients, so you're going to a client saying, you're my biggest client ever, I don't comply with any of the things that you typically want, and you should trust me and let me do it anyway. And that, what I just said, is the essence of enterprise sales at a startup. So my recommendation is be very open with those clients, right? If you add enough value, they'll be willing to take a risk with you. So,
or some of them at least.
Some of them, and the ones that don't, you got to move on. You'll come back to them later and say, listen, we're not ready yet for you, we'll come back later. But typically you should be able to say, listen guys, I'm not yet SOC 2 compliant. I'm starting the process now. Let's agree that I'll complete it by date X, right?
And you're a firm believer in starting that early.
Yeah, as early as possible, right? So these types of procedures are really, I'll use the word egregious to developers, right? So developers hate having to work in that environment. The faster you get them used to it, the faster it's going to be part of your culture. It's just harder and more expensive to do it later while, you're putting out fires all day long. Now I have to dedicate resources.
You mentioned this a while ago, right? It may mean that the developer can't store code locally on their laptop.
That's exactly what it means.
They have to sign in, go through a VPN, and then they're working on code remotely.
Yeah, so we've transitioned the vast majority of our development team to Chromebooks. You think they're happy about that? No, they hate it. But we don't have a choice, right? Because the other challenge is, if I have kind of an MDM environment where I'm managing multiple devices and multiple different the cost just becomes really great. And again, as a startup,
Just bite the bullet early
things.
on. People who come in know what they're getting into. You haven't taken away their candy once they've got
Yeah,
used to it.
and be very open with those clients, right? And say, hey, Mr. Bank, I can't do on-prem right now. Is there a way we can try this off-prem? No, okay, let me come back to you in 6 months. And find a client who says, I'm willing to test it. We're not going to give you our PII. We'll just give you the header file so you can figure that rest later after you pass compliance. And find the folks who are willing to work with you to get there. We're not where you need to be at. We'll start the process with you. Let's get a few POCs in place. And POCs are a good way to do it. I always do paid POCs if I do a POC. Most of our clients say they don't really need POCs, but if you're trying to prove something new with a client or there's some kind of trust issue that it's not there yet, they don't believe in the product yet, charge them for it, right? I mean, if they're not willing to pay for it, they don't care. And if you're not willing to pay for it, you're an early startup.
It's earnest money to them.
Yeah, I mean, you just want enough for it to go through the compliance. I mean, you want to go through all the procedures that you're going to get hooked up on later, right? I want to go through compliance. I want to go through legal. I want to go through security. I want to go through procurement. I want to make sure that I'm in the system. For whatever, I mean, 15, 20, 50,000, whatever you can extract, it doesn't really matter. We typically roll that into if we do a POC and we charge for it, it rolls into the first
Credit
month.
towards it.
Yeah, it's just to go through the process to show that you're serious about it. Because I'm about to put a lot of effort into this as an early stage company. That first step, the first 3-5 clients never scale, right? So you have to figure out what that's going to look like. Let's make sure these folks are serious, that they're investing as much as we are.
Like, it's very easy for corporate to ask. And a lot of startups will go spin wheels on it. If you can't get money out of them, it's very easy to think you're close to a deal.
It's
you're 8 months away, and they're just thinking about it.
I mean, the alternative, and this hasn't happened in this company, but in previous companies, I learned a lesson. Try not to make them too many times, right? 2, 3, 5, no more. You go through the process. You went through an amazing POC. You're done. It's like, let's go. And like, okay, now we have to bring all the people to decide. Like, wait a minute, what was this POC?
Where were they now?
Yeah. It's like, well, we haven't gone through procurement. We haven't gone through legal. We haven't gone through compliance. We haven't gone through security. And, there's a committee that needs to sign off. It's like, okay, so I'm just where I started, right? I just have a little more confidence that it might be a client. That could still take a year,
So
right?
lessons learned is to bring as many of those people on board in the beginning.
Oh,
as
yeah.
possible.
So that's probably the
Understand the
most
process.
important lesson, right? So when you're doing those POCs, make sure, first of all, after you've gone through all the procurement, and gone through the processes and got paid for it to make sure they went through the technicality, make sure the decision maker is on the other side. So I know the venture folks on the different companies are going to hate me for saying this. Ignore the venture guy. Ignore the venture guy at any of the major firms. That person is noise. He's in between you and the decision maker. He's a traffic cop. He might be an amazing person. He might really mean well. He's static and buffer between you and a decision maker, and the more you talk to him, the less you understand your client's real need. Use him to get there, right? I mean, there's some really, really good ones out there. I don't want to name any. There are really amazing people that we worked with, but you don't want to be working with that person. You want to work with the decision maker.
At the end of the day, they're not the people they're not using it. It's not their budget that it's coming out of.
And then we're not going to sell your product to the team any better.
Yeah.
So they'll come back and say, oh, here's what they did. Do you want it? Oh, no, okay.
But it
great.
helps to make them a hero because they'll be good to you later.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to lose these people, right?
Yeah.
And again, in the big firms, these are really smart people that really take their job seriously. They're very passionate about it. They really want to help. I wish I could name names. There's some that have been really incredible. I mean, still.
But
folks that are
title-wise, these
incredibly
are
helpful
chief
to us.
innovation officers, the corporate venture funds. Anyway, without dwelling on it,
Yeah.
good points of entry, but you got to get close to the user and the decision makers as soon as
Especially at
possible.
the early stage, because you're looking to understand the problem, and the buffer doesn't understand the problem.
So I want to keep going on one of the topics we were talking about. So you're a startup, enterprise sales, especially in data. What are the additional barriers? So we talked about the security issues. What are some of the other objections that you have to get around when you are a startup trying to sell a large corporate, either around, it could be your financial runway, it could be around your personal experience. What are they and how would you address them?
Those are very separate, right? Financial runways is a real fear. And so there are different opinions on this. I'll just give you mine. Yeah, it's a real risk. I mean, there's no way around it. And you're going to be upfront with your client about it and say, listen, I got runway, I got 2 million in the bank or a
How does
million
it
in the
usually
bank.
come out? Like, say
Oh, you're gonna ask
I'm the
pretty
client.
quickly.
I'm the client. You're the corporate. When do they raise this as a flag?
It'll be
How-
pretty
and how?
fast on. I mean,
So what,
first of all,
what
they
would
don't
it
even
sound like?
Well, it may not sound like anything, right? They may not
Yeah.
say anything. They might just say, you know, it's a little early, or you're getting the feeling that they're not trusting you, right?
So I have to look at you and understand that you're thinking, I don't know how much money you have in the bank. Wait, hold on. You, the corporate, are about to put a bunch of months and many people on
You might be
working
gone in
with
3
me.
months.
You know, you don't want to go into that effort if I have 3 months of runway and then like I'm done.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say I figured out that that's really what's behind your hesitation.
Well,
What-
at first
what
I'd
can I-
project in any way possible. I know this is hard. You have to do it not in a disingenuous way, but you have to project that you're bigger than what you are at any given stage, right? So assume the corporate image as soon as possible. Talk with words like us. Talk about the breadth of the team, right? Give
Stakeholders.
give them the sense that there's more around there, right?
Well,
So
do you have to wear a tie?
I never wear ties.
Okay,
I
so
don't
there are
even
red
wear a tie
lines.
to my
Even
wedding.
with you, they're
Yeah.
red. Even with LD, there's a red line.
Yeah, but you do. I mean, you have to kind of play the part, you know,
You need
and
more
show that you care.
absorb the wording, the pacing. Feel like as soon as possible they know that you know what
Yeah.
it's like to be part of corporate.
Yeah, and I would also, if you have experience in the past, credentialize the hell out of yourself. So if you've done this before, even not in the same environment, give them a sense that, listen, I haven't done what you're talking about right now, but this is my background. This is the best I've done.
How did you do it? Just so
Well,
it's
in our
concrete.
case, it's a lot easier. We have 4 companies in the past, and
So
you
say
know,
I had
enterprise
I
grade.
had 4 prior startups.
Yeah.
We dealt with large companies like A,
We
B,
sold,
C, D
we worked with big
before.
banks, big hedge funds, right? So it's easier. A lot of people are talking to, especially the bank, insurance companies, and hedge funds. We actually worked with in the past, so it's a lot easier.
Yeah.
So I don't know that that's the best example now, but I'd put myself in my shoes in previous companies. You just say, make them think you're really, really smart about their industry and about their problem. Be open with them. You know, you will be my biggest client, because maybe
Don't
they
try
are,
to
right?
hide that.
Don't try and hide it. Don't try and say, oh, I got big clients just like you. You will be my biggest client. I'm going to work my ass off to make sure that it's going to be happy. I need you to tell everyone what an amazing experience this was. I will not sleep. I don't have kids. There's nothing I'm going to do except make sure that you're happy and tell everyone how amazing that is, right? And that's very important. You're trying to build kind of a personal confidence. You try and build a personal relationship with the people there, right? People that are going to take a risk on you need to know you personally, because they're putting their personal reputation on the line, and they need to know that you take that seriously and that you're not going to fail them, right? I have a client, funny anecdote, not a very big client, but actually not our smallest, but one of our smallest clients. And when we closed that deal, I looked him in the eye and said, I got you covered. I'm going to take care of you. I know this is a lot of money for you. You're a small organization. I'm going to get you covered. And recently, we didn't do as well as we should have. And I called up that client and said, listen, I'm really sorry. I don't look in clients' eyes and tell this off, and banks I don't care, right? They're just people, right? And there are exceptions, right? But I looked you in the eyes and told you I got you covered, and I feel like I didn't deliver on that promise, and I'm going to make it right, and I apologize, right?
Because from his perspective, that's whether he
That's
gets a
his world.
promotion or not, whether
That's
he gets
his
a
world.
bonus. It may be his company.
It is his company, right?
Yeah.
So it really matters. So be very upfront with your clients. Take responsibility when you're not doing it right. Make sure to earn that trust and maintain that trust, and it's not easy. And to the extent that you can, try and find the way to move past some of the challenges that you know you can't solve right now. I can't pass compliance right now. Be open. I can't pass compliance right now. Let's figure out how to work around it. Things of that nature, I think, help build that trust and help move to some kind of initial pilot or some kind of close.
To what extent does highlighting the investors that you have address some of those concerns?
It helps. I can't announce our latest round yet, but in private meetings, I use it very often. It's helpful, right? So if you walk into a meeting and say, I'm backed by Sequoia, backed by CoStar, yeah, of course, that's an easy ticket, right? Most companies at a seed stage, especially in the prop tech world, are not backed by Sequoia and CoStar. They're backed by angels that you've never heard of half the time. If you can find folks who are in the industry, that's great. I got advisory
Borrow
board
some
of
street
some
cred
yeah.
there.
I got advisory board of some folks. I'm a big believer in advisory boards. Don't let them overrun your thought process, but definitely you want to get their advice. Give them some equity. I know this is counterintuitive to a lot of other people. Give them some equity. Make them care, right? Make them so if they generate a product that you can actually sell, they get a piece of that, right? And bring them in. Keep them disciplined. Bring them in once a month. Yeah.
I like to make this pretty concrete. Like, what are we talking about for an active board of advisor at a seed stage startup?
Yeah, I'm cheap in that sense, but it's also because I bring in more people, right? So I try and bring in a bigger group into the fold. So I would think about there's a technical group, people who help you on the technical side. Those are people who are former CTOs, DevOps people, really technical people who can help you with architecture. Assuming you're in a technical company. If not, you probably don't need that.
Yep.
Those folks I'm fairly generous with because they're solving really, really big problems that otherwise you can't solve. So when generous might mean 0.1, 0.15%, somewhere in that range.
And they're giving how many hours over what period of time, generally speaking?
I try and become friends with these people very early on, so they want to spend more time with us and help. In the early stages, that's probably, right? Maybe an hour or two a week, something like that.
That's a lot,
It is, it's a lot. That's why you want to compensate them as well. Not cash, but equity. And I typically don't put on vesting periods. It's hard to get advisors on board with an investing schedule because I'm going to spend 3 years. I don't even know. I can't even think next month, right? So you are taking a chance on them as well. So to the extent you can, try and be a little cheaper and be willing to give a little more down the road. For the business folks, again, probably in that 0.1%, 2, 3, 5 of those who are really core to what you do will add credibility, something like that. Generally, when it comes to employees, I'm very generous in equity, right? Yeah. I think the rule of thumb is your first 10 employees, you take about 10% of your equity on that first option pool. And I think that's a good rule of thumb. And you have a CTO that comes in.
That's after the 2 or 3 founders.
Yeah, after the founding, exactly.
Yeah.
After the founding team, you create an option pool and expect the first 10, 15 employees to take that option pool and leave maybe a percent of that 10 for that advisory group. Maybe in our case, it's a little smaller equity pool to be able to work with those founders.
Just to get a little technical, so a lot of the times when you raise, they'll ask for a 15% option pool. So are you saying a 10% option pool tends to work better, or just take the first 10 points out of the 15 for your first 10 hires, and then you've got the next 5% for more of those, and then you'll kind of re-up it as needed? Yeah,
so it sounds like there's a lot of optionality to a startup. You really don't have as much optionality. You're kind of dictated by the term sheet you take, and I'm a cynic when it comes to that. You got to keep the lights on. You got to get another at bat. That's really all we do as founders. Behind every successful company, there's a founder that wouldn't give up no matter what they told them, right? Yeah. And so you don't have as much control. I recommend 10%. I think that's a good number every single round. Assuming your rounds are 12 to 24 months in between, it should give you enough room. If you're finding that you're unable to attract talent, maybe next time around you should be thinking about a bigger option pool. You can always pull back from the option pool. So let's say that's the flip side. People are like, I'm 15%. It's not. You shouldn't be afraid of that, right? So if you allocate 15% and you didn't, or you set aside a pool of 15% but you didn't allocate it, that goes back to you at the end, right?
So actually, you split that with the investor.
Well, yeah,
it comes out of your pocket, and then you split it back to everybody.
Yeah, but you get part of it back, right? Yeah. So it's like a tax refund, right? You're getting some kind of credit back on some of it. So it's not, you don't lose the full value. To my point.
I want to roll back to one other thing that we didn't talk about, but like sometimes, especially when you have a product that's deeply integrated with the workflow, the fear isn't so much that you go away, because I don't really care about you or me. It's that the program goes away, the code goes away. So one way people have talked about addressing it is code escrow. I know you've told me you're not a fan of that. Why don't we talk about A, what that is, because I'm not sure everyone knows what it is, and B, what you prefer instead.
Yeah, so maybe let's step back. What's the real challenge, right? Yeah. To your point, I'm an insurance company, and I'm building a predictive analytic model on your database, and it's going to be running 24 hours a day. And then one day you disappear for whatever. You got bought out, you ran out of money. I don't care about you. I just care about the fact my model doesn't work anymore. I got a mission critical piece of my company that's running off of that model. So now how do we solve it? So one option is code escrow. So code escrow is typically where I take the code that's running this project, I put it in escrow, right, in some kind of holding cell, for lack of a better term. Mm-hmm. And then if something happens, certain terms, then it gets released to the target company so they can continue running the program internally with a third party without having to worry if you exist or not. I'm not against it, although I'd recommend against it if you can get away with it, for a few reasons. One is, once you put something in escrow, it's an escrow. You lose control over it. You might be in a dispute with that company where you feel that you've done everything right, and for whatever reason they're trying to mess with you, and now you have to try and deal with a escrow agent about whether or not the conditions were met. There might be some kind of arbitration in that process, maybe even litigation, God forbid. Now you have a lot of money as attorneys, and as a startup that's devastating, right? Yep. So that's one challenge that I think is difficult about code escrow. The second is the code you put in escrow never actually solves the problem. There's a whole infrastructure around that code escrow it's not covered. So it doesn't actually solve the problem for the corporation as well. So even if I had that code and I got it from you and everything was legit and you even agreed to give it to me because we're going out of business, I got to give you the code, I still can't run the program. I still have the whole infrastructure that I have to go build around.
By infrastructure, you mean the people who understand the ins and outs of
it could be literally literally technical infrastructure, right? The compute power, the Docker container in which this sits, right? It could literally be the technical challenge, right? And to your point, the people that have been running it. Startups are not fully autonomous.
Yep.
That means there's manual operations all the time happening that are just going to stop happening in that point. So I don't tell. What I tell corporate is, listen, it doesn't solve your problem, doesn't solve my problem. Here's something else. How about we put in the contract a few things? One is that if we get bought out, no matter what we do, we're going to make sure that we can maintain your contract and live to the life of the contract, which now pushes them to do longer term contracts, right? So you get a little bonus for you instead of being a 1, 2, 3 year. They might do 7 years, right? So you now have a really long term contract because they're afraid to lose. So it's good on both sides. The second is you say, okay, if God forbid something happens, I'm going to give you the infrastructure. I'm going to show you how to do it and come help you set it. This is a personal guarantee, right? This is not a...
Even to the extent of walking over with like a blade server and like, let's plug it in under your desk.
Hopefully not a lot of on-prem because that's a disaster. I mean,
Yeah.
we hate on-prem. I can't describe how terrible that is. And the irony is that on-prem is really not more secure, right?
No.
I mean, the thought that, some bank here in the city with some on-prem in Jersey is going to be more secure than, Amazon or something, just unfathomable. But some still believe that. But yeah, you need to be able to get them to feel and say, listen, I'm going to first of all, I'm going to put in the contract that we're going to come and help you set up and do a transition at your expense because we're not going to have any money anymore at that stage, right? But we're going to come and do it. And there's a personal part of it which says, listen, I'm here for you. I'm not going to let you down, right? I'm going to, if God forbid something happens, I'm going to come and take care of it for you. I've never been in that situation in my life. I hope to never be. But
it gives them some confidence that it's not just they flip a switch and the backup generator doesn't work.
Yeah.
It's more a matter of like, we're there. It's going to cost because we have the money. Oh, that was my phone. Sorry about that. That's embarrassing.
Yeah.
But it's also like, hey, I'll be there. It's realistic to them, right? They'll know they'll be there. They know they got to pay a little bit. They'll know that you'll be there for that. And it gives them a little bit of time to come up with alternatives.
Yeah, and if they're really adamant, I need code escrow, fine, there you go. It's not the end of the world, right? I mean, it doesn't cost you anything to put in, well, it does cost you a little to put in code escrow. It really doesn't cost much, yeah. But if you can get away with it, I recommend staying away from it.
Okay, I should have mentioned this a little bit earlier, but if you're in and you are interested and you have questions you'd like to ask, you can always, sorry, Dustin, how exactly do they do this?
Put them in the comment section wherever they're watching.
Wherever you're watching it, throw it into the comments section, and it'll eventually make its way to my laptop, and we'll ask them if there's some things we haven't already covered early on. So I'd like to switch gears just a little bit here. Let's take it up a little level, right? So we've talked a lot about what the data environment is in the real estate world versus where you'd come from originally in the financial services world. Then we talked a lot about how do you do enterprise sales, specifically how do you deal with the objections that come up when you're a startup doing enterprise sales with 5 and 6 figure price tags on it. Now I want to take it back to kind of broad big picture, right? So in a way, there's a saying that like history repeats itself. It's just like jazz. It's slightly different every time it comes around. So
I'm a big jazz fan.
Do you believe that's the case with real estate? Do you see how it played out in financial services over the past 2 or 3 decades? Do you see it playing out similarly in real estate? And what does that mean? Can you translate that to like we're going to see more of X, we're going to see less of Y?
I'd say yes, but. So I think in the financial service industry, if you asked the traders kind of in the early 80s, let's say, are they good investors? They would think that they're really great investors at the time, right? And they're
talking stocks, bonds, commodities. They assume they're gods.
They were good, right? And there was innovation around the Milkins of the junk bonds and things like that. Different structures, but really that was the core of what was there. And there was no massive event. I mean, there were a few big events, but there's no massive event that just reshaped the industry, right? But if you look back into today, back to the 80s, you can't even recognize that world. So that will happen again in the real estate industry. So 20 years from now, we'll look back today and say, this is insane how the world looked.
How did we ever do business that
way? But it's not going to be overnight. And it will be especially slower in the real estate industry because the liquidity is smaller and the time of the asset switching hands. So let's say an Opendoor, right? Opendoor is a really cool company. In some ways, it's still an experiment. We're still learning if that's going to work. But it's a really, really cool company productizing the home buying and selling experience in the sense that, I'm taking an asset that's essentially not homogenous, which is the financial services industry, and I'm trying to homogenize that asset. You're getting the silver house, the gold house, the platinum. The silver has certain granite. There's some kind of conformity that I know what I'm expecting, which is essentially to be a product or a brand is a promise, right? So there's a promise that's being made to me that I know is going to be kept. Let's say Opendoor does phenomenally well. It has endless money and just knocks it out of the park. It's going to be 200 years before they switch to liquidity just on their asset class, which is sub $500,000, probably sub 300,000.
And why do you say it'll be 200 years?
Because it just takes a long time for the stock to switch, right?
How
many people sell homes a year?
Buildings live a long time.
Yeah, people underwrite still, which is still phenomenal to me. They're underwriting 75 years in the future as if it's the same use for a building. I'm underwriting an office building, and the estimate is going to be 75 years the same use. If you're underwriting like that today, please stop. There's no way in hell those models will ever live out to themselves. You may not know what else to do. That's a different discussion, but that's not going to live. And
that's
so
a fair
it's
point.
really
Like the building I live in, 1917. Right, building great, still works. But we're talking about assets that have
100 years later, it's still there.
Century plus lifespans.
Yeah. And again, we're talking about an industry of people who are so risk averse, they hold on to the asset, right?
They're almost 100 years old themselves.
Yeah, right. Or some of these families have been doing this for hundreds of years, literally. So it's going to be slower. It's going to be a lot slower because the asset turnover is slower. We're going to see more innovation on the commercial side than the residential side, because in the commercial side we see in office there's this kind of hospitalitization of everything.
Yep,
everything's just hospitality. Everything's front of the house. Everything looks like a hotel. It's the Four Seasons. You're getting hugged, right? Look at Convene. You walk into a Convene, that experience is amazing. Is it scalable financially? I don't know. I don't actually know their models, but it's really nice to walk into a Convene. You walk into a WeWork, it's nice. Not as nice as a Convene, right? So I think you see that.
So it's not a W, it's more of a Sheridan or a
Radisson. I don't want to talk any bad about these people. Some of those folks are clients, so keep to myself on comments on which hotels are better or worse. But yeah, so you'll see it a little faster in the office space. Retail's being restructured, right? We have to burn, a third or half of all retail in the U.S. before retail makes sense again here. So we're going to see I was just talking the other day with someone about what do we do with all these malls? They're just deserted. How do we reinvent malls? I don't have a good answer, by the way, but
what about the first floor retail in almost every residential
in New
commercial
York,
building?
it's bad. It's really bad.
So that's going to be repurposed somehow.
It's becoming amenities. Everything's a CVS, right? So you have every corner has 2 CVSs, 2 banks, right? Because those are the only people that can have the end mile distribution. I think we'll see a lot of these small micro grocery stores. There's some really cool companies out there building really, really small grocery stores to have everything underground and robots. I'd mentioned the name, but I don't want to pull them out. I don't want to out them quite yet. And there's another Israeli company that's doing last mile delivery within the city, also a really, really cool company. These companies are really, really cool because they're reinventing those spaces that right now are underutilized in price, but you're going to see a little innovation of that. Residential is going to be more around less the condo co-op, which is what we see a lot here in New York or San Francisco or major cities, LA, Chicago, right? You're going to see more innovation on the single family homes, which is what Open Door and Knock and all those types of companies are doing because there's more homogenous product.
So you're saying like a split level ranch of a certain age in like Texas is more like a single, the same type of building, same age in North Dakota. It's kind of same, but different. Ish.
I'd go a lot smaller. I'd say that, a cul-de-sac in rural anywhere, right? So if you go out to, my mother lives in Cumming, Georgia, right? All the houses look the same. What's that?
Sorry,
yeah, she loves it. She used to live in Florida, hated every second there, lived in Boca, hated the taxes, hated the weather. She really loves it out there. 60 degree all day, she loves that.
Yeah.
But when you think about those types of places, all the houses kind of look the same. There's the 1, 2, 3, 4 model, and it makes pricing a lot easier, right? Your actuary models are a lot tighter. It was built in 1990, 2000, 2010. All the 1990s are the same. If you upgrade the kitchen, there's a little premium on that. If you didn't, right? So because it's a little more homogenous, it makes the market making part of companies like Open Door or Not, the Guild, all these other companies a lot easier, right?
And is that why you think iBuyer is taking off on single family
That's
more
exactly it, right? So iBuyers are here to stay.
Just I is for instant buy when they put an instant offer out on a property based on the numbers.
Yeah, like Open Door and Zillow are the 2 big ones right now. There are a few other smaller ones. They're not small; they're still really big, and they seem to all be doing really well, which tells you that there's
which tells you that no one's figured it out yet, but we'll see.
There's a good product market fit. It means that they're willing to buy. I think their challenges are around pricing, right? They need to narrow the actuary model so the risk is lower, right? Even Open Door, they kind of obfuscate it, but there's still a fee built into it, and they're trying to be on par with the agent, so at least they're not losing that. But it's not necessarily cheaper right now. It will be over time. Yeah.
What do you think on the brokerage side, either on the commercial or the real estate brokers? New homes, purchases, rentals, are they the travel agents of the future?
Yeah, so I don't know. It's an open question. to me, I think of this as an agency problem. When do we have an intermediary, and what does that intermediary serve? And this is more broad of a question.
I actually should use stockbroker as the example, so because we're talking about
Yeah, it's another good one, right? But I would actually go to used car salesman. I think is a really
Okay.
good one. There are very few car salesmen left. We see direct to consumer sales in some of the big brands like Tesla and things like that. The resellers are disappearing really fast, right? And I think what you see there is that two things happen. One is the information asymmetry came down. So I know what I'm buying. It's the 1994 Toyota Corolla. I'm probably not buying a 94 Toyota Corolla, but 2014 Toyota Corolla. It's 6 years old. I know what I'm getting, right? There's a Carfax. There's a True Car. I know what other people are paying. So the information asymmetry has been narrowed. And the second part of it is the risk of making a mistake is not that high. So if let's say I bought the wrong car, okay, I'll sell it. I'll eat the loss.
2-3 years, we'll deal with it.
We'll live, right? If I buy the wrong home, it's devastating. First of all, the information symmetry is still really great. And companies like Open Door and Zillow and those companies are trying to break that down. But it's still, your agent knows a lot more about that asset and the environment than any of those portals do. That's changing, and eventually that won't be the case. Localize is a really cool company here in New York that's trying to help companies, and I think probably also outside of New York right now, but trying to help break down that barrier so when a person's looking for a home, might be able to understand that environment much better. So that's happening, right? The challenge is the risk is still really high. So you're buying the most, 70% of home buyers in the U.S., I don't know what the world is, but it's their first home.
Yep.
In the next 20 are buying their second home. It's not that they became millionaires, they're just selling the first and buying the second, right? So the vast majority of home buyers have no idea what they're doing. It's the most expensive asset in their life. They know nothing about it. It's kind of a 1 or 2 time purchase. I'm terrified, right? All an agent has to do is, you fill your form 430? My 430 what? Oh my God, my kids, my family, I have to put it, it's terrifying, right? And again, I represent the broker preying on you, but it doesn't have to be the case. That knowledge, it matters. You want a hug, right? And
so what I'm hearing is, in some ways, having the broker is almost like an insurance policy,
it's a
because
hug.
it is such a big
It's
decision.
really a hug. You'll be okay.
So do you feel, you'll be okay, I'll catch it if you forgot to ask about
You'll
termites.
be okay. It's not going to be terrible. You might pay a little more. It's not going to be terrible.
So does that imply that where the stakes are lower, maybe in the rental market, they're going to be the first to go, perhaps?
Yeah, that's how I'd predict it. First of all, you see rentals already. The U.S. is a little unique than some other countries, but in other countries, brokers don't have the type of power they have in the U.S. And I think the reason brokers have this power in the U.S. is the MLS system, right? So MLSs are multiple listing services, or these little monopolies, or 640-ish across the U.S. And if a broker wants to operate in that environment and get access to liquidity, they have to work in that. Now, there are really good things in MLS, right? They provide standardization of data, and you can't do all the discrimination things that you would have been able to do otherwise, and there's a standard contract. So a lot of good things, and liquidity is public, but there's also a negative side to it. They're basically a local monopoly, and they control that environment, and it makes it very difficult not to work with a broker, right? But to your point, I think in the rental market, which is already probably outside that MLS world in many places, the cost of making a mistake is a lot lower, the information asymmetry is a lot lower, the friction's a lot lower. Yeah, so that's why you see these big rentals. That's why Avalon and Glenwood and all these companies do really, really well when you go direct to rent, no fee, quote unquote, whatever that means, right? So definitely we'll start with rentals. In smaller office spaces, right, WeWork, Knotel, yes, they have a little broker on site, but it's not the same type of broker. You know what product you're getting. It's fairly homogeneous.
It all looks basically like this.
Yeah, it's kind of industrial, kind of glass, right? And it's basically the same. And they're nicer and lower. I love industrial spaces. They're really, really pretty. I think they're really nice. WeWork is now trying to figure out how they do TI, tenant improvement in all their new buildings now that they have their little snafu. But I think you're going to see it in that case. And then in residential, that's why you're going to see iBuyers on that sub 300 killing it, and then they'll move up to the sub $500,000, and maybe they never leave that. That's about half the buildings.
Because then you get into too much idiosyncratic.
Yeah, but that's about half of the stock in the U.S. So maybe the other side of it is the Compasses of the world, where, and that I think the Compass is, to me, very much like the big commercial brokers. And the big commercial brokers are going through a process which is very much like financial services, which is the intermediary disappears and becomes a trusted advisor. Their role changes. Instead of saying, I have access to liquidity that you can't find anywhere else, I can actually distill a lot of information and help you make a more educated decision, and it's worth your while to pay me for that because I'm generating value to you, right?
You have all that data. Go ahead, figure it out. Or spend an hour with me. I'll winnow it down.
Think of a doctor, right? Let's say you have a very specific condition.
Yeah.
You know more about that condition than anyone, right? You've been Googling it to death. You have every single piece of information. Your doctor does millions of things, right? You still go to your doctor, right? Same thing with the legal challenge, because The doctor's job, besides giving you a hug and telling you it's going to be okay, which is important. I don't underestimate it because we're humans and that emotion really matters to us. So that's not going to disappear no matter what you do. So it's very important to remember it. But even after the emotional part of it, I want you to tell me from all those things, yeah, okay, so it's a little out of the range. It's fine. It's often out of the range. Don't worry about it.
It's okay. Don't worry about it.
Right? Helping you understand and distill that information. So I think you're going to see a trusted advisor kind of relationship continue, and I think that's important. And it's an open question, what intermediaries last going forward. It's not going to happen overnight. Commercial brokers and residential brokers on the high end are going to be around for a long time.
Because again, those are the biggest risk, the least standard.
Yeah, and what you will see, I think, in the commercial world is I think about 50-60% of all commercial transactions in the U.S. are what we call onesies, right? The 7-Eleven franchisee buys a space from the place, or the Dunkin' Donuts guy sells to that, the store sells, right? These are people who have never transacted with anyone before. They'll never transact with anyone again. They don't talk to each other. That will probably go to commercial MLSs like by proxy, Crexy, by LoopNet, those types of companies. Will hopefully do a really good job in standardizing the bottom end of that. The big ones are still really complex transactions. When you think about AAA assets across the US, it's about 500,000 assets. If you want to go into the Bs, it's maybe 2 million assets. They're really complex. There's a value add component. Really sophisticated buyers and sellers on both sides of it, typically, right? They really know what they're doing. So
that's the equivalent of structured financial transactions as opposed to just selling.
Think of building an MBS or mortgage-backed security tranches or collateralized loan obligations. They're really complex. There's a banker on that other side.
I'm going to buy 100 CDOs. I'm going to separate them all, reslice them. Okay. Let's take a couple of questions. We did get to some of the questions that came through just in the course of the normal conversation. I do want to take a moment and remind you that we're going to have another Dreamit Live next week on Wednesday afternoon with Michael Beckerman. He has been in the industry for a decade or more, runs CRE Tech, which he insists on calling CRE Tech, some of the best conferences in the space, and a really, really fun guy.
Yeah, I'm a big Beckerman fan.
So LD will be on the other side of the camera for that one. He's going to talk about what works in the space, what hasn't worked in the space, what startups are doing right about getting in front of potential customers from his perspective as someone who's been either marketing to them or running events for close to 10 years. Let's take one or two questions before we quit here. Okay, we talked about how you try to sell a pilot once you're in the room with the right person. The question I have here is, how do you find exactly the right person to start with? How do you make first contact with them? How do you actually literally get in the door?
Yeah, I mean, the first stage is who's the right person. You have no idea in the beginning, right? So you can make a lot of mistakes. So be prepared for...
To what extent does title help, or is in real estate it's like totally misleading?
The smaller the firm, the more likely you're talking to the founder, the top dog, right? Because that person is, I mean, even in big firms, some of these big firms which are family oriented, there's one person who matters.
And make all the decisions.
Yeah, that's just one person. It could be a $30 billion fund. There's still one person. So if he drops dead tomorrow, God forbid, the firm ends.
Smaller and family owned, just go for the CEO.
Go to the top, right?
Or his son, perhaps.
Or the CTO. So trying to identify who the person is, right? If you're in banks, insurance companies, there's a little more structure. So you want the head of the business unit that has the problem, or the head of the technical unit who's been tasked to solve the problem. So you're going to get to, remember, you're going to get to one, you're going to have to get to the other, so the faster you can.
You either start with the user or the guy whose budget it comes out of.
Yeah, and you're not going to, I mean, yes, you can put an SDR and start doing cold calling. It's unlikely to work at that early stage. So, I mean, hustle your ass off. That doesn't change. So, you do what you need to do. Call anyone you need to, but try and get some warm intros there. Try and get someone, an advisor, a friend, somebody in the industry, someone you knew in your past life, and say, listen, can you introduce me? Get in the door. Don't start with selling. Start with listening. Spend the first 10, 15 of those meetings just listening. I'm just here to learn. Try and get them in to be an ally. If you see they're really smart and helpful, put them on your advisory board as fast as possible, right? And try and create some allies in that space. Once you've identified who those people are, in our space, that's typically going to be events, right? Marketing dollars, on Google are probably not going to get you a lot of leads, although we have this little chap on the bottom of our screen. I've been trying to kill it forever, and we just got a big client off of it, so I can't kill it.
Permanently lost that battle now.
And I've been trying to kill that for a long time, but you really want to go to events, get in front of a lot of people in a really short period of time. It's old school, sales. You're going to get a lot of cards. You're going to give a lot of cards. Most of those are going to be a waste of time. You're going to follow up on all of them. You're going to follow up SaaS style, right? You're going to follow up 5 times before you take a no. until I hear a no, I'm still following up, right? I'll put it on auto program and keep emailing you with some kind of version.
I have reminders every 4 to 7 days.
Forever, right? I'm not going to let you go until you say no. If you say no, I'll respect it. But if you don't say no, as far as I'm concerned, you're willing to listen to me forever, right? Yeah. Probably not the case.
Do not accept ghosting.
Yeah, exactly. You're going to get ghosted, right? Just don't give up. And so I'm not going to mention names. There's a really cool startup in our space just raised a lot of money, and he was telling me the story the other night of how he raised that capital. And so I said, how'd you even hear about that firm? They're not a well-known firm, really cool firm, but not a well-known firm, right? So he said, well, this SDR was emailing me. He said, I bet she emailed you. You search for your email and see that name. I'm looking, sure enough, the name was there. And I've been ignoring it for a year, right? And she followed up like 2 or 3 times. And I never answered, right? So he said she was bugging me for a year, every week. And at some point, I appreciate your tenaciousness. Let's talk. And that was their round, like a really big, high double-digit round, for like a triple-digit valuation, right? So really, really successful company and really, really successful valuation. So it just shows you that even on the venture side, right, the persistence really pays off. So don't give up. But that being said, you're looking for people who are moving to the next step. So those who are responsive, those who will introduce you to more people, just like when you're raising capital. Did I make it from the associate to partner? Did I make it from partner to more partner meetings, right? If you're not making progress, put it on a plan until you make that next step and move away from your time because it's your most valuable resource and you have to spend it on those that you think are more likely to convert.
Cool. One other question before we wrap it up here. I have a choice of 2 here. Let's go with, let's talk a little bit about the actual fundraising process. There is no fun in fundraising, but any tips, hey, don't ever do this that you'd like to share? Anything that hey, this is the standard best practice?
I think of it just like sales. There'll be a lot of randomness. Top of the funnel is big, more likely to close on the bottom of the funnel. And as I said a second ago, think of how you're moving through the steps, right? If it's okay to meet an associate at the beginning, I prefer to meet partners. This, obviously. We've had these conversations before.
We arm wrestled over this a little bit.
Yeah, I really prefer to meet partners because your time's your most valuable resource. The likelihood of associate closing is a slower process. So you want to meet the decision maker as early as possible, but you start wherever you start, right? At the end of the day, we're not always picky and have that luxury.
Sometimes you get a warm intro right to the top, sometimes you don't.
And sometimes that associate that you never thought would be around, in our specific case, turned into a partner that next day, right? And I would have never thought, right? We had term sheets, as you know, from other really great funds.
Could not have planned that one better.
Yeah, right? So me being the cynic on that, not wanting to meet associates, ended up meeting an associate that, she was unbelievable, right? So, so it turns out that way as well. So, don't be rigid in anything, typically in life. But you're looking for moving forward in steps, right? Yeah. If you meet the associate, know that the next step is let's meet the partner. And if you see you're not getting there, keep the follow-up program to get the partner. You hit the partner as fast as possible to get to that partner meeting. You got the partner meeting as fast as you can to create FOMO in a term sheet, right? You want to be able to push that process going forward as fast as possible and accept that it's going to be very random. I'll give you a funny anecdote. This last round we closed. I'm leaving the partner meeting in the Valley on my way to go meet another partner, another firm, which I thought we would close around with, right? I know them a long time. I already had kind of guideline what that term sheet would look like. So I'm leaving the partner meeting, and it was a really awkward partner meeting. There's people on a screen. It's just one of those hard pitches, corporate kind of world. So you're doing that pitch, and then on the way out, I asked the partner, how's it going? He goes, we're really slow, and then it's going to take, okay, fine. In my mind, I don't care, right? I got really great fun, but I got this next one that I know I'm going to get a really good term sheet. It's like a AAA.
That's your backup call, is that you're leaving.
It wasn't my backup. It was nice, but they're going to be slow. It may not even be relevant, right?
Got it.
On the way to that next one, I get stood up. So I call and say I'm on my way. I'm actually leaving a couple minutes early. He goes, listen, it's Burning Man. Next week, I don't remember what day it was. I'm building a table for Burning Man. And I got to finish this table. I'm so sorry. I'll meet you next week. So I got stood up for a guy, not even because he was Burning Man, because he's building a table. Not you know who you are, so I'm sorry. I'm bringing this up. And I get the phone call. I'm pissed off, so I'm going to drive back to San Francisco. And I get a call from the partner from there. Just gave me. He goes, listen, can we grab lunch? I'm like, it's probably gonna tell me no soft. I thought it was a good pitch, And I was like, listen, we're gung ho. Here's a term sheet. Let's go now, right?
So the ones you thought were going to be slow gave you a term sheet
while
you were being stood up by the one who you thought you were going.
Yeah. So if I have one strategy is raise money around Burning Man. Those who are not at Burning Man will try and close the deal with you before Burning Man's over. Apparently.
It's funny like that. There's used to have a video that we shared at kickoff, or a picture. There's I wish I could remember who it was, The video is this one guy, he's a runner, he sees the tape, he's going like this, and all
Just
this one
falls.
guy zips past him, beats him by like a quarter of a second.
Yeah.
Came out of nowhere, and they have a big caption on the bottom, "Don't be that guy."
Venture capitalists are really, really, really competitive. Good companies, venture capitalists are fighting to get into the deal. Leverage that. If you got some traction,
if you got heat, go for it.
yeah. And listen, the flip side is if you need capital, make sure the lights stay on. Right. All you need is another at bat. You do whatever you can to keep the lights on. That's your one job as a founder. Besides hiring people, which is your second job, is keep the lights on. Right.
Yeah. And if you don't do job one right, you can't do job two.
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you for being with us. I think we're pushing the hour plus. Once again, thank you, LD. We appreciate you coming in here.
Thank you all for listening.
We appreciate your coming in here as well. Also, hope many of you will join us on Wednesday, November 20th, to hear from Michael Beckerman. There'll be some more random cursing and a different take on the project from someone who's been looking at it, from kind of on top down, as organizing one of the biggest conferences in commercial real estate in this country. Thanks again. We'll see you again next week.